Alright, stop scrolling. This is the one. Go to sleep. The complete Roman Empire saga. 400 years, all in one place. I've spent over 2 years of my life crafting this series, all by myself. Over 20 hours of content, bringing you the ultimate chronicle of Rome. From the golden age of Augustus to the peak under Trajan, through the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. Well-seed coalition-s reforms, Constantinople's new capital, and the final split after Theodosius. This was a massive undertaking. If you appreciate the effort, a like and subscribe means the world. No time. Hit save for later, so you don't lose it. Now let's begin. Welcome to the Roman MP. Let us now journey together, back through the mists of time, to the classical world of the Roman Empire. Constantinople was the capital of the Roman Empire for its 2nd millennium. So, how many times was it besieged in total? If we don't count civil wars, from the official founding of the capital by the great Constantine in 330 AD, until the Ottoman army captured Constantinople in 1453 AD, there were roughly 8 groups of powers that besieged Constantinople 17 times. These include the Siege of Constantinople in 626 AD, jointly launched by the Sasanian Iranians, and Slavs the 2 sieges by the Umayyad Caliphate from 674 to 670, 78 and from 17 to 718 the Bulgarian siege, after Nike PH or OSI's northern expedition failed in 830 Nike PH, or OSI's northern expedition failed in 813 the 3 sieges by the Rus, in 807 and 941 the 3 sieges by the Crusaders, and 1200 for the 2 sieges launched by the Nicae. That's right, what's missing is the first siege of Constantinople by a foreign power, the siege of Constantinople by the Goths in 378 AD. Although this siege itself was of little significance, it was full of symbolic meaning. Not only did it mean that Constantinople was besieged for the first time, but it also introduced a heaven-sent hero, the great Theodosius. Why were the Goths able to reach the gates of Constantinople? To understand this, we must start from after the Battle of Adrianople. On August 9, 378 AD, a very dark day since the division of the Roman Empire into East and West, the Roman Emperor Valens was disastrously defeated and killed in the Battle of Adrianople. The Roman army lost nearly 20,000 soldiers, and brave warriors died on the battlefield. After defeating Valens, the main force of the Gothic army took the opportunity to surround the defeated Roman troops in Adrianople. These defeated generals, however, showed the glory of the Romans at this moment. In addition, the Goths' siege capabilities were weak, and they failed to capture this fortress. The Goths had to bypass this city and approach Constantinople to the south. But after a small scale battle under the city walls, the Goths ultimately had to give up on capturing Constantinople. Unable to take the city, the Goths turned to plundering the surrounding countryside. Valens's death forced the imperial institutions of the East to operate without an emperor. The commander Julius, who had not participated in this battle, after learning of the disastrous news of the defeat, also launched a retaliation against the Goths, managing to gather them together and then slaughtering them. At this time, the Western Emperor Gratian was still in Sirmium. Upon learning that his uncle had acted willfully and almost lost the main force of the East, Gratian had mixed feelings. I, a 19-year-old young man, can remain steady. How can you, a 50-year-old comrade, be so reckless? Although Gratian's later end proved that he was not a steady person either, Gratian himself had no time to grieve. After ravaging Thrace, the Goths moved to Illyricum the following year. Gratian realized that he could not face the threats from the east and west alone. Therefore, the top priority was to appoint a capable and trustworthy general to preside over the situation in the east. In the end, Gratian chose Theodosius. although Theodosius's father could be said to have died because of him. There was no more suitable candidate. So on January 19, 379 AD, Gratian announced Theodosius's promotion and also handed over the administrative diocese of Macedonia and Dacia, which were originally under his jurisdiction, to his management. This was all the help he gave to Theodosius. Theodosius thus officially stepped onto the stage of history. Theodosius's first priority after ascending the throne was to stabilize the situation in Thrace. Although major cities like Constantinople were preserved, the rural grassroots of Thrace could be said to have been devastatingly hit by the Goths. The loss of 20,000 soldiers was not a fatal blow to the great empire, but the honor and confidence of the Romans were shattered in this defeat. Theodosius had to adopt steady and conservative measures. He led his army to be stationed in Thessalonica, monitoring the Goths' every move. He recruited new soldiers as much as possible everywhere to supplement the garrisons in various places. He built fortifications and fortresses in cities at all levels to strengthen their defensive capabilities. Theodosius ordered the army not to attack if they were not sure, if there was even the slightest possibility of failure. He fought a war of attrition in the Thracian region by building strong camps and fighting stubbornly. In 379 AD, he won several small battles, but in 380 AD, he suffered a major defeat due to a mercenary rebellion. However, Theodosius's propaganda ability was obviously superior to his military ability. He promoted his small victories as great victories and his great defeats as small defeats. The Roman army fought back hard, and the day of pacifying the Goths had already appeared on the horizon of the Danube. But the victories recorded in the annals were all ambiguous and obscure. Whether they won or not was like a shadow. But the same principle still applies. Battle reports can be deceiving, but the battle line will not lie. Theodosius's counterattack against the Goths was always limited in effect. He could not pacify this group of invaders by force, who was to blame for Valens losing all the elite troops of the East. He could only solve it through compromise and diplomatic means. For a group of roving bandits who could not take cities, the diplomatic strategy of division and disintegration was more effective than military means. Theodosius had his officers bribe the middle and high ranking officers of the Goths with heavy gold. This measure was very effective. The Romans were short of troops, but their financial resources were still abundant compared to the barbarians. Many Gothic officers chose to switch sides. In 380 AD, Theodosius formally entered Constantinople and then met with the leader of the Goths, Adrianople. This Gothic leader entered Constantinople, and Theodosius personally welcomed him. The two sides were happy and harmonious. Facing this then greatest city in the west, Adrianople's eyes went straight. He exclaimed, "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe there is such a magnificent capital. The Roman emperor is a god on earth. A bold and reckless person, if he disobeys orders, will surely have his life taken to atone for his crime." Adrianople signed a peace treaty with Theodosius and became the first Gothic leader to reconcile with the Roman Empire. Unfortunately, this Gothic leader did not enjoy a few days of happiness. In January of 381, possibly because he ate too much, Adrianople accidentally died during Theodosius's enthusiastic hospitality. Logically, this accident was very likely to cause a serious diplomatic incident, but Theodosius took the opportunity to hold a grand funeral for Adrianople, taking the opportunity to announce his generous terms to the other Goths. The Goths also went along with it. The two sides thus began intermittent negotiations. Finally, in 380 AD, the Roman and Gothic sides signed a peace treaty. Theodosius's terms for the Goths were very generous, because he could not eliminate the Goths, so he had to be generous. The Goths were allowed to live in the Thracian region on the south bank of the Danube. A part of them was also transferred to Asia Minor. The Roman government allocated the necessary grain and cattle to the Goths, encouraged them to work hard, and also exempted them from tribute for a certain number of years. The Goths had land ownership in the designated villages and areas and were not required to forcibly adopt the Roman way of life, establish Roman administrative institutions, and other measures. They could still maintain their original customs and language and were allowed to promote and pass them on. They had internal management autonomy within their jurisdiction. In return, they had to recognize the suzerainty of the Roman emperor and obey Roman command and discipline. In addition, they did not have to obey the provisions of imperial law and the judgments of officials. That is to say, apart from the Roman emperor, they did not have to listen to anyone else. The Gothic royal class was abolished, but the hereditary chieftains of various tribes and families still ruled their people. In the most important military system, the appointment and dismissal of Gothic generals were decided by the emperor. The Roman imperial government organized 40,000 Goths into the establishment of the Eastern Empire. The army was given the title of Foederati, allied troops. These people wore gold-colored clothing, were given high salaries, and enjoyed preferential treatment. When the empire needed them, they needed to be mobilized to defend Rome. Under the sugar-coated bullets of the Romans, the Goths gradually split into two opposing factions, the pro-Roman faction, the anti-Roman faction, led by Adrianople. Both leaders were invited to a royal banquet. After a round of drinking, these people all got drunk and even cursed each other in front of Theodosius. Theodosius had no choice but to announce the end of the meeting. The pro-Roman Ravita, not stopping at half measures, simply followed behind Adrianople, drew his sword, and killed him on the spot. The attendants of both sides immediately took up their weapons, and a serious conflict almost broke out in front of the emperor. In the end, it was suppressed by the palace guards. In short, the vast regions of Moesia and Scythia south of the Danube were from then on no longer under the direct jurisdiction of the Romans. They became a state within a state ruled by the Goths, laying a serious hidden danger for future rebellions. However, when Theodosius signed the treaty, it was only a stopgap measure to temporarily ensure peace in one area. After stabilizing the situation, Theodosius devoted himself to the governance of internal affairs. A great man governs the country and Pacific as the world. First, he must cultivate himself and regulate his family. Self-cultivation goes without saying. In terms of regulating his family, Theodosius was far superior to his old predecessor, Constantine. He arranged the environment of the palace to be very elegant. Theodosius had a pure temperament and a gentle personality. He was happy to enjoy normal banquets and sensual pleasures, but would never indulge in them. His passion for the opposite sex was also limited to legal objects. He respected his uncle as he did his own father, and loved his nephews as he did his own children. He interacted with his close friends on an equal footing. Theodosius was grateful, kind, valued talent, and was diligent in governance. Theodosius was very interested in the history of Rome and even the world. Whenever he read about the cruel practices of Cinna, Marius, and Sulla in depopulating Rome, he was always indignant. For many major historical events, Theodosius made his own sharp comments, thereby promoting his governing philosophy. Theodosius is truly a virtuous person. The emperor is virtuous. However, as long as one is human, one will not be so pure. After living in Constantinople for a period of time, this emperor of not noble birth fell in love with this feeling. He enjoyed the luxurious court life, indulged his nature, enjoyed the pleasures of the four seasons, and fell into the vortex of regency. What was worse was that Theodosius gradually became irritable and angry, and few people could dissuade him. Sometimes, on an impulse, he would make tyrannical decisions. After causing serious consequences, Theodosius would feel regret. Year after year, day after day, Theodosius formed a closed loop of impulse and regret. The wicked people of Antioch launched a rebellion. Theodosius violently suppressed it and forcibly punished them, and then regretted it and softened, treating the rebels leniently. In 387, a citizen riot occurred in Thessaloniki. Theodosius was also furious and launched a violent suppression. As a result, before he had time to regret, the army had already entered the city and launched a massacre. This matter also attracted the attention of the church. Under the admonition of the then Archbishop of Milan, Ambrose, Theodosius I was forced to use the means of penance to obtain the Archbishop's forgiveness. These examples also reflect Theodosius's character flaws. Of course, these two rebellions are stories for later, and we will talk about them later. Here, let's first talk about the problem of Armenia. After the failure of Julian's eastern expedition, Armenia became more and more isolated. Valens had previously tried to regain the initiative in Armenia. Unfortunately, the sudden Gothic invasion shattered the Roman arrangements in Armenia. After Emperor Valens withdrew his army from Armenia, the head of the Armenian powerful families, Manuel Mamikonian, deposed and expelled King Vars Edat, who was trying to strengthen royal power, and established the brothers Arsaces, II and Vologases, who also belonged to the Ars Acid family, as kings, and managed to maintain a fragile balance between the two great empires. However, around 385, after the death of the regent Manuel and Vologases, Arsaces III's attempt to monopolize power caused the pro-Iranian faction to once again lead the wolf into the house. At this time, the 70-year-old emperor of the Sasanian dynasty, Shapur II, had already passed away. His brother Ardashir II, after reigning for less than 2 years, was also sent to see Zoroaster by the domestic nobles in 383 AD. Shapur II succeeded to the throne at the request of the Armenian nobles. Shapur II placed Khos Roviv on the Armenian throne. Arsaces fled west to seek the protection of the Romans. However, unlike in the past, in the years when Armenia was experiencing its traditional internal strife, Roman Diron had been negotiating on the issue of Armenia and even the Caucasus since 384 AD. Theodosius dispatched a confidant from his side to be in charge of the negotiations. This confidant was not only his nephew Minos in Minos law, but also had Vandal traditions. His name was Flavius Stilicho. That's right, the one who later, after Theodosius's death, served as the regent of Honorius with the highest military position of Magister Utrisus Militia E. The negotiations continued intermittently for several years. Until 387 AD, the two great empires finally signed the Treaty of Aecina. The treaty created a new border between the two empires, extending from a point east of the Odos Iopolis to a point west of Mush, thus partitioning the kingdom of Greater Armenia. Sasanian obtained the larger eastern share, commonly known as Pers Armenia, while the Romans retained the western part, including a small part of the Aecina region. In addition, the Roman Empire also recognized the suzerainty of Sasanian on over the kingdom of Kartli. The power of the Sasanian dynasty thus flourished greatly in the Caucasus region. What do you ask about the Armenians? The Armenians only needed to wait to pledge allegiance to one of the two great empires, and Roman Diron had many more things to consider. After the death of Arsaces III, the princes of Roman Armenia under Roman rule retained their autonomy for the next century, and Khosrov IV and his descendants would also continue to rule the eastern kingdom of Armenia until 428, when, at the request of the Armenian nobles, the King of Kings abolished the Armenian king and reorganized his territory into the frontier province of Armenia. The effectiveness of this treaty was higher than any previous one. In the following 100 years, apart from some small scale conflicts, the border between Rome and Sasanian Iran was largely quiet. This is known in history as the 5th century peace. The causes of this peace were multifaceted. The losses of the Battle of Adrianople greatly reduced the strength of the Eastern Roman army. In the following half-century, the political influence of the Eastern army declined accordingly. The Constantinople government had neither the ability nor the will to launch a high-risk Persian war. On the Sasanian-Iranian side, they also faced internal worries caused by the expansion of royal power and a border crisis caused by the strong rise of Central Asian nomadic peoples. Maintaining the existing borders of both sides and the defense of the Arabian Desert and the Caucasus mountain passes became an important part of the relationship between Roman Sasanian Iran during this period. The eastern border of Rome welcomed a long-lost peace. However, the affairs of the Roman Empire were just that bad. Just when the treaty was signed in 387 AD, Theodosius, the emperor of the Eastern Empire, as if following a computer program, was about to embark on the road to the west to fight a usurper. This time, the rebel in the west was named Magnus Maximus. You may ask, who is this? Where is my little shot Gratian? Gratian had already died in a rebellion in 383 AD. Why did this intelligent and promising young emperor end so hastily? Why did Theodosius' western expedition to fight the rebel have to be delayed for several years? We will talk about these questions next time. Video production is not easy. I hope everyone will give more likes, shares, and interactions so that we can continue to update. Roman emperors take turns. Maybe it will be my turn next year. As is well known, the Roman Empire often broke out in civil wars. The triggers of these civil wars were also strange and varied. For example, the civil war between Constantinople and Julian that we talked about before. Its most direct trigger was a dark joke which showed the former's distrust of the latter from beginning to end. The trigger of the civil war between Pompey and Caesar was because Crassus, one of the tree of Myrcas, accidentally drank molten gold, which forced the conflict between the two to become public. The trigger of the civil war between Octavian and Antony was Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt. So is there any civil war whose trigger was because of love? If life were only like the first time we met, a beauty's smile can overthrow a city. You know what? There really is. And the protagonist of the civil war is quite famous, the Roman Emperor Theodosius. The trigger for his civil war was a beautiful princess. Why did Theodosius need a princess to make up his mind? The story has to start with his little shot leader, Emperor Gratian. Gratian was a Roman emperor with a very low profile. Although his profile was low, the difficulty of his being an emperor was not low at all. When he was only 16, his father died suddenly on the front line. His old brother was pushed out by many senior generals to compete for the throne, almost causing a civil war. It was not easy to consolidate his throne through strong means and flexible compromises. When he was 19, his uncle Valens died on the front line again, and the Roman elite was wiped out in one wave. Gratian had to clean up his uncle's mess. It was not easy to promote Theodosius to stabilize the situation and defeat the invading barbarians. Before he had a few years of peaceful life, Gratian died in a mysterious rebellion. What is all this? He was clearly a promising young man. How could he have succeeded in his career and then suddenly died? Hey, this video will tell his story. Gratian was born on April 18, 359 AD in Sirmium. His mother was the first wife of Valentinian I. He was appointed consul in 366 AD and co-minus emperor the following year, becoming the heir to the throne at the age of only 8. In 370 for AD, at the age of 15, Gratian, under his father's arrangement, married Constantia, the posthumous daughter of Emperor Constantitius II, establishing a blood and legitimacy connection with the Constantinian dynasty. The Valentinian family, although not as fatherly and only brotherly and friendly as the Constantinian family, their family ethics problems could still be made into a TV series. The story between Valentinian and his two wives has always been a topic of great interest to later generations. For specific content, you can refer to the second issue of this series. After his father's death, Gratian and his brother Valentinian II, who was 12 years younger, jointly ruled the Western Empire. Among them, Gratian obtained Gaul, Hispania, and Britain, and at the same time managed the Danube border. Italy and Africa were nominally under the regency government of Justina in Mediomena. Gratian undoubtedly occupied the dominant position. After all, you can't expect a 4-year-old child and his mother, who is not familiar with government affairs, to make any important decisions. Gratian's personality was gentle and obedient, and the impression he left on others was very positive. Under the education of his mentor, he was strong, resolute, and full of responsibility. This can be seen from his successful defense of the Roman border. But since the regents appointed by his father, that is, his teachers, left one after another, this lively young man showed his true colors. He delegated the power of managing the government to ambitious people, allowing them to play with the law at will, while he himself indulged in meaningless pastimes. In short, he loved to play. A young man who had lived in the army for many years, whose father died early and lacked education, achieved a series of commendable achievements, and then he chose to lie flat. The young Gratian often exercised his physical fitness and martial arts, especially liking to ride horses, shoot arrows, and throw javelins. He enclosed a large area of gardens, raising a large number of birds and beasts, throwing his duties and majesty as an emperor to the back of his mind, and wasting his time on showing off his skills and courage in hunting activities. If you look for it in Roman history, it is somewhat similar to Nero and Commodus. If you compare it with Chinese history, it is somewhat similar to the combination of the Zhengdi Emperor Zhu, Hu Xiao and the Wanli Emperor Zhu Yijin. Of course, Gratian's own moral character was quite good, and these hobbies were not heinous. The fatal thing was that while he was indulging in games, he also neglected to handle daily government affairs, and even ignored the feelings of the army. This was very dangerous. If he was not careful, he would follow the old path of Constans I. In his early years, Gratian was actually quite popular with the army. He followed his father in the army for many years. Under the supervision of his mentor, Gratian often claimed to be a friend and student of the army, spending a lot of time in the military camp talking cordially with everyone, caring about the treatment of the army, and attaching importance to the health of the soldiers. As a result, when Gratian became addicted to hunting, he only cared about the superb hunting skills of those generals. For example, a small team of Alans was sent from the army to the palace to serve as guards. This group of people was professional in hunting. Gratian was immediately fascinated by them, and even let them alone be responsible for the safety of the emperor. He himself often wore the costume of an Alan nomadic warrior and paraded in public. Not only the old Romans of the Orthodox banner, But even the Germans of the inlaid banner could not stand it anymore. Gratian was unaware of the crisis and even felt good about himself. Little did he know that his end was coming soon. In 383 AD, the British officer Magnus Maximus rebelled and went straight for Gratian. Magnus Maximus, a Spaniard, was said to be a distant nephew of the elder Theodosius. He followed the elder Theodosius to Britain and was an important meritorious official in the British War. In 380 AD, he was sent to Britain again and defeated the invasion of the northern Scots. Seeing that Theodosius had become emperor in the east, he gradually became unbalanced in his heart and was full of resentment towards Gratian. It just so happened that the Roman army there was also quite dissatisfied. The two sides hit it off and simply rebelled. Maximus gave a speech to the outside world, saying that although he had some small opinions about Emperor Gratian, he had never thought of rebellion. He was still loyal to the monarch and patriotic. Unfortunately, the soldiers under his command did not listen to him and insisted on making him emperor. "So, what can I do?" he said. "I'll just be emperor reluctantly." Maximus assembled the Roman army in Britain and immediately went south to cross the English Channel. He disguised his army as ordinary civilian ships, tricked the attention of the Gallic garrison, and then landed on the European continent, attacking Gratian without stopping. Gratian was in the city of Paris at this time. After learning of the situation, he immediately organized an army to try to resist, but the local people and soldiers were indifferent to him, and his main general even defected to Maximus's side. Gratian had to flee the city. He led only 300 followers and fled south, like a stray dog, trying to seek the protection of his brother Valentinian II. Gratian wandered all the way, but no city was willing to take him in. It was not until the city of Lac du Num that the governor chose to open the city gates. Who knew that this was a conspiracy? Gratian thus walked into a trap and was directly sent to Maximus's hands. Although he begged bitterly, Maximus was still unwilling to let go of this young and promising monarch. He died inexplicably at the age of only 20-4. The political situation in the Western Roman Empire changed instantly, not to mention that Theodosius did not have time to rescue him. Even the regency of Valentinian II did not have time to react at all. Now it was awkward. Should they attack the rebel or not? Logically, they should. But at this time, several emperors were unwilling to fight. Maximus's foundation was unstable, and his legitimacy was insufficient. He did not dare to act rashly at all. Valentinian II was not yet an adult. Theodosius considered that, on the one hand, Maximus's military prestige was outstanding, and a rash war might not be won quickly. On the other hand, if he sent troops to attack Maximus, the barbarians on the other side of the Danube would very likely go south to plunder, leaving him unable to attend to both ends. So the various parties fell into a strange peace. Theodosius, facing the death of his benefactor, showed extreme grief on the surface, but secretly, he still received Maximus's envoy. This envoy was a respected elder. He said that his master Maximus did not intentionally kill Gratian. The blame should be on those arrogant and domineering soldiers. Maximus still hoped to live in peace with Theodosius. Everyone should work hard together to bring the Roman Empire into a new glory. Theodosius's mood was very complicated. Gratian, in a sense, was the enemy who had put his father to death, but he was also his unquestionable benefactor. He certainly wanted to lead troops to kill those traitors, dogheads, directly, but at present it was really impossible. In the end, Theodosius chose to compromise. He demanded that Maximus not attack Valentinian II again, preserving the rule of Italy, Africa, and Illyria for Gratian's brother. At the same time, the Archbishop of Mediolmina, St. Ambrose prevented Maximus's ambition to hold Valentinian II hostage. In the following years, the two sides maintained such a fragile peace. Maximus set up his residence in Trier. This was also the last Roman emperor to be permanently stationed in the city of Trier. He then implemented reforms in his territory. His most significant measure was still in the religious aspect. He strongly cracked down on polytheists and heretics. Sympathy for the Jews was his label. He had publicly condemned the persecution of the Jewish temple by Roman Christians. This caused a lot of dissatisfaction. Some even exclaimed, "Our emperor has become a Jew." But this was not important. What was important was that Maximus ultimately could not resist the temptation of the Italian court. Little friend Valentinian II opened the door quickly. "Uncle, I'm coming in." In 387 AD, Maximus sent troops across the Alps and went straight to the city of Mediomena. Valentinian II and his mother Justina abandoned the city and fled. They fled to Aquileia and still felt uneasy, so they simply fled directly to Thessaloniki, and then frantically requested Theodosius I to send troops to rescue them. Maximus thus took the Italian region without a fight. Theodosius led the capital Senate of Constantinople to personally welcome them, expressing that he must conquer the heretics and maintain the authority of the Roman Empire and the Valentinian dynasty. But when asked when he would send troops, Theodosius immediately became entangled. His son was still too young, and his own health had always been poor. Should he send troops or not? At a critical moment, one person stood up. That was Valentinian II's sister, the 20-year-old Princess Galla. It just so happened that Theodosius's wife, Flaccilla, had died the previous year. Galla personally went to persuade Theodosius to send troops to fight the rebel. The effect of the persuasion was indeed very good. In addition, Theodosius successfully signed a peace treaty with Persia, eliminating his worries in the rear. Next was the traditional special ability of the Roman Empire, the East-West Civil War. Theodosius sent the Frankish general Arbogast to lead the land army, directly marching along both banks of the Danube, making a gesture of crossing Raetia and directly attacking Gaul. He himself personally led a large army to march towards Pannonia to meet the main force of Maximus. As for Valentinian II and his mother Justina, they followed Theodosius's navy to land in Italy and recover the city of Rome in one fell swoop. Theodosius and Maximus confronted each other on both banks of the Sava River near Sicily. It was a familiar plot again. However, this time the actions of both sides were much more agile than last time. The two sides soon fought at Poggio. Maximus's army was mainly composed of Gallic and British troops, with a large number of Germanic mercenaries. Theodosius, on the other hand, had Allan and Gothic auxiliary troops. The process of this battle was actually not important. Theodosius's victory was mainly due to his cavalry advantage. His cavalry force forcibly crossed the Sava River directly in front of the enemy. The army of Maximus on the other side was stunned and did not stop them. Theodosius's cavalry immediately launched a charge, defeating the enemy, defending the high ground on the other side in one fell swoop, and then lead the main force of the army to cross the Sava River. Maximus's brother, Marcellinus, seeing that the situation was not good, immediately led reserve to launch a counterattack, but did not achieve results before nightfall. The battle temporarily stopped due to the arrival of night. It started again the next morning. After another fierce battle, the remnants of Maximus's army completely collapsed, and they all laid down their arms and surrendered. Maximus barely escaped with his life and fled to Aquileia at high speed. Theodosius and Arbogast did not stop for a moment and followed closely behind, surrounding the city of Aquileia. The city's residents did not want to die, with Maximician directly launched a mutiny to control Maximus. This rebel was finally sent to Theodosius's hands. After a period of ideological struggle, the emperor chose to hand him over to the murderous soldiers. Maximus was immediately beheaded and his head was displayed to the public. The result of this civil war was much easier than expected, and the casualties were not large. Theodosius finally entered Meidiomedia. After the spring, he led his army into the city of Rome, enjoying the glory of victory. However, Theodosius could not stay in Rome for long. He soon returned to Constantinople, handing over the Western Empire to Valentinian II, which was considered to repaying Gratian's favor. Valentinian II's mother, Justina, died shortly after returning to Rome. Valentinian II was forced to stand on his own. In his early years, he had always been educated by his brother Gratian. The two were really carved from the same mold. Their personalities were similar, and their ways of handling things were also very similar. He sympathized with the Arian faction, but under the influence of the Archbishop of Meidiomedia Street, Ambrose, he gradually leaned towards the Nicene faction. He was loyal to the state, could exercise self-minus restraint, abandoned a life of pleasure, and devoted himself to work. He was very protective of his two sisters. Even for the common people of low status, he would make reasonable judgments. But such a gentle young man was about to face a similar end as his brother. Valentinian II did not participate in the triumphal procession held by Theodosius. He and his court were placed in the city of Vienna. However, Theodosius seemed to have no intention of letting him truly hold power. Before returning to the east, he appointed Arbogast to the highest military position of Magister Militum. Arbogast then used Valentinian II as a puppet and became the real ruler of the Western Empire. However, young people are too arrogant. Valentinian himself, a hot-blooded young man, how could he endure this grievance? In 392 AD, he chose to summon Arbogast to the court and then dismissed him from all his duties in person. Arbogast was directly amused. My authority is not something that an emperor like you can dismiss at will. Valentinian I was furious and even directly drew his sword and rushed forward. The rat has shown his true colors. Unfortunately, he failed to hurt Arbogast in the slightest. A few days later, Valentinian II was found to have committed suicide in his room. Was it really suicide? Anyway, all the officials claimed that he had committed suicide. Theodosius's wishful thinking was almost achieved. However, this confidant general of his would soon disappoint him. Arbogast acted first and reported later, supporting his secretary, the scholar Eugenius, as the Western Emperor. Only then did he send an envoy to explain to Theodosius. Theodosius did not immediately give a clear position on this matter, but his action of promoting his other son, Honorius, to emperor on January 23, 393, had already shown everything. The haze once again shrouded the empire. Civil war was imminent. But before that, next time, we will first look at how Nicene Christianity defeated all its rivals and was established as the state religion of Rome. Video production is not easy. I hope everyone will give more likes, shares, and interactions so that we can continue to update. At the same time, everyone is welcome to join our Roman history interest group to discuss Roman-related topics together. In addition, the exclusive channel for Power- upcharging is continuously being updated. Was the fall of the Roman Empire caused by Christianity? In the comment section of previous videos, many viewers gave a positive answer. Everyone was heartbroken about the Roman Empire. It's all Christianity's fault. If the Romans still believed in polytheism, then there would definitely not be a result of destruction. Is this really the case? Let me first state my point of view. Christianity not only did not cause the fall of the Roman Empire, but instead extended its life. Why do I say that? Don't be anxious. Let's first understand how Christianity finally achieved victory in the Roman Empire and became the sole dominant religion. This has to be said of the last emperor of the unified Roman Empire, Theodosius. If Constantine untied the shackles for the spread of Christianity, then Theodosius completely established the advantage of Christianity. However, similar to the rumor that Constantine established Christianity as the state religion, in fact, Theodosius did not explicitly declare Christianity as the state religion of the Roman Empire. His policy suppressed polytheism and prohibited many polytheistic activities, including the famous Olympic Games, so it was interpreted as establishing Christianity as the state religion. And in recent research views, Theodosius's decrees are considered to have a relatively limited impact. Did Christianity really destroy the Roman Empire? What was Theodosius's religious policy really like? And how did the Nicene faction achieve final victory? We will talk about it slowly next. Rather than saying that the choice of Christianity led to the fall of the Roman Empire, it is better to say that the Roman Empire changed its policy towards Christianity with the changing times. The Roman polytheism inherited from the classical era, although rich in content, had a fatal weakness. Its organizational structure was located in the traditional city-states and their elite sponsorship system. As these free city-states were gradually replaced by a nationwide, top-down bureaucratic system, more and more local elites chose to enter the bureaucratic system to seek promotion, rather than investing in their hometowns. The economic foundation of polytheistic worship thus became weaker and weaker. When the Roman Empire encountered the 3rd century crisis, plagues and barbarian invasions further severely damaged the remaining polytheistic organizations. In the midst of the chaos of the city's collapse, while the military and political systems were being reformed and unified nationwide, religious affairs were also put on the agenda. As a monotheistic religion, Christianity thus entered the vision of the then emperor, Constantine, and received his strong promotion. Even if his nephew Julian once tried to revive Roman polytheism, it was only a flash in the pan. And everyone should note that the polytheism revived by Julian had already become a monotheistic religion that revered Jupiter as the main god and imitated Christianity in its organizational structure and believer management. The difference from the ancient Roman polytheism was already quite large. After Julian's death in the Eastern expedition, Jovian restored the unique status of Christianity. However, he, who was in power for only 8 months, did not have time to formulate more profound policies. After the two brothers Valentinian and Valens came to power, they showed completely different religious attitudes. Valentinian, because of the military difficulties in the West, did not have much energy to devote to religious work, so he showed an attitude of non-interference in religion. Valens, on the other hand, had more free time and interfered more frequently in religion. The Nicene and Arian factions of bishops in the Eastern Roman Empire were evenly matched. The two sides attacked and slandered each other, and even used insidious tricks such as assassination and framing. Valens's own religious belief leaned towards the Arian faction, so he once again targeted Athanasius. This legendary saint was thus overthrown for the 5th time and then died of old age in 373 AD, ending his legendary life. However, Valens ultimately did not carry out a strong suppression of the Nicene faction, and even did not take action against Treat, Basil, who had cursed his son's illness and death. The Arian faction did not gain a significant advantage under his rule. After the successive deaths of Valentinian and Valens, Gratian of the Western Empire continued his father's non-interference policy at the same time was very friendly to the Christian church. Theodosius in the East, on the other hand, because he was born in Spain, was a staunch Nicene Christian, adhering to the Nicene Creed centered on the Trinity. Constantine was superior to Theodosius in military and political aspects, but Theodosius could in turn defeat Constantine in the Christian aspect. Theodosius had major contributions to Christianity during his reign. First, he basically ended the struggle between the Arian and Orthodox factions and resolutely implemented the Orthodox religion with the Nicene Creed as its core doctrine. Second, he suppressed the long-standing Roman polytheism, which had been severely damaged to a few protected areas such as Athens. At the end of 379 AD, in the first winter of Theodosius's reign, the emperor, who was in his prime, fell seriously ill and almost lost his life. After recovering from the illness, Theodosius did not dare to follow the previous tradition of only accepting baptism when he was dying. He also did not dare to say anything like "I will be baptized after the war is over." In February of 380, Theodosius was baptized in Thessaloniki before setting out on an expedition against the Goths. The emperor took the opportunity to give a speech, announcing his faith to the world and, at the same time, setting the tone for the empire's religious policy. "We are greatly pleased that the various nations under our rule can maintain a pious faith in the religion passed down to the Romans by St. Peter. Now we must firmly convert to the religion followed by the Bishop of Rome, Damasus, and the Bishop of Alexandria, Peter, who has the holiness inherited from the apostles. That is, in accordance with the teachings of the apostles and the gospel. Let us believe in the one true God of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and piously believe in the Trinity, with equal divinity and honor. We judge that only the believers who follow this doctrine are qualified to be called Orthodox Christians. At the same time, we also judge that all other believers are extremely foolish madmen and should be marked with a shameful markand called heretics. At the same time, we hereby declare that their illegal gatherings may not use the respectable name of the Church. In addition to being condemned by God's justice first, they will also suffer our severe punishment in this world, which will follow God's punishment." Theodosius's Nicene Orthodox faith was actually not firm. His own understanding of religious theory was not high, especially the difficult to understand Trinity. He had also been interested in Arianism. There is also a heretical story here. It is said that Theodosius appointed his eldest son, Arcadius, as co-emperor. The two monarchs sat on the solemn throne and accepted the allegiance of their subjects. The Bishop of Iconium, Amphilochius, went to the throne, saluted Theodosius with a respectful attitude, and then greeted Arcadius with a very cordial attitude, as if treating a commoner's son. Theodosius was angered by his rude behavior and ordered this rustic priest to be immediately driven out of the audience. Just as the guards were forcing him to the door, this bishop played a trick on Theodosius. "Your Majesty, the Lord of Heaven is ready to treat people as impious as me in the same way, because I only know how to worship the Father with a joyful heart and refuse to acknowledge that the Son has the same honor." Theodosius immediately embraced the Bishop of Iconium. He learned an unforgettable and important lesson from the latter's very dramatic metaphor. He still had to believe in the Trinity. However, this kind of persuasion itself was very unministry-niperation. To defeat Arianism was still a long way to go. The religious thought of the people of Constantinople was extremely chaotic. Every citizen of this city had his own understanding of Christianity, regardless of whether they really understood its profound doctrines or were just echoing others. They preached doctrines in shops and on the streets. If you wanted to exchange a piece of silver, he would tell you what the differences were between the Father and the Son. If you bought a loaf of bread after you opened your mouth, the other party's answer would be that the person of the Son is lower than the Father. If you went to the bathos and asked if it was ready, the other party's answer would be that the Son was created from nothing. After being baptized, Theodosius immediately set about solving the problem of the Arian faction. As the saying goes, if you can't solve the problem, solve the person who raised the problem. Theodosius did just that to the followers of the Arian faction. First step, after the expedition against the Goths ended, Theodosius immediately summoned the Archbishop of Constantinople, Demophilus, and gave instructions to the high-ranking clergy of the Arian faction, asking them to make a choice: immediately either agree with the Nicene Creed, or immediately give up everything and hand over all property to the believers of the Orthodox faction. This included the bishop's residence, the Hagia Sophia Cathedral, and the ownership and use rights of all churches in Constantinople. Demophilus had a persistent religious belief. He chose the path he should take without hesitation, preferring to live a life of poverty and exile, rather than accept heretical ideas. Second step, Theodosius forcibly pushed the Nicene bishop St. Gregory of Nazianzus to the position of Archbishop of Constantinople. He sent a large group of royal guard soldiers to occupy the Hagia Sophia and, with the support of the army, forcibly suppress the Arian believers. These Arian believers, regardless of gender or age, crowded the streets, and even the windows and roofs were full of people. A noisy clamor mixed with fury, sadness, surprise, and despair. Faced with widespread dissatisfaction, Theodosius announced that if the Arian bishops and clergy still maintained a profligate attitude and refused to believe or acknowledge the doctrine of the Council of Nicaea, then he would expel all these people from the churches. He appointed his subordinate Shaper to be responsible for this special task and granted him considerable power. At the same time, he formulated relevant laws with military force as a backup to guide the church in reform, giving it full responsibility for handling its own affairs to actively promote various tasks. Fortunately, the eastern provinces did not experience large-scale turmoil and bloodshed in this turmoil. The Arian believers did not resist fiercely. But sadly, at this moment, the Nicene bishops, with the reduction of external pressure, began to fight for power and profit internally again. Therefore, it was urgent to hold a unity meeting. Everything was ready. In May of 381 AD, Theodosius took the final step and convened a religious council aimed at solving this problem, known in history as the First Council of Constantinople. The main agenda of the First Council of Constantinople was to reaffirm the authority of the Nicene Creed and completely establish the absolute leadership of the Nicene Orthodox faction. The participants of this council were only 150 bishops, and these bishops were all carefully selected, not including the bishops of the Roman Curia. There was no need to worry about the situation of cursing on the spot, as in the previous Council of Nicaea. The result of the meeting was naturally without any suspense. The council passed 7 canons. First, it condemned various Arianisms, as well as fought Ionism, Apollinarianism, and other heresies. Second, it updated the zoning decree determined by the Council of Nicaea, requiring bishops in various places to abide by the restrictions of their respective dioceses and not to go to other dioceses to perform church duties without authorization. Third, the Bishop of Constantinople should enjoy the privilege of honor second only to the Bishop of Rome, because Constantinople is the new Rome. Fourth, it did not recognize Maximus, who was from the Egyptian Church, as the Bishop of Constantinople. This Maximus had once deceived Gregory. The 5th to 7th articles were, respectively, the recognition of a religious book of the Roman Church, the restriction on accusing bishops of not abiding by church law, and the confirmation of the procedure for certain heretics to enter the church. The last 3 articles may have been established in the 2nd year after the meeting, that is, in 382. By the way, the later Eastern Orthodox Church recognized these 7 canons, while the Roman Catholic Church only recognized the first 4. These canons have been controversial since their formulation, especially the clause that the status of the Archbishop of Constantinople is second only to the Bishop of Rome. This made the Pope of Rome extremely dissatisfied. This article was not accepted by the Pope of Rome until the Great Schism of the Catholic Church and even the fall of Constantinople. But when Theodosius presided over the meeting, these canons still stabilized the religious situation of the empire, especially by completely defeating the Arian faction in the country. In the traditional view, the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed was also formed after this council. But one thing is certain, Theodosius never announced anything in the council to establish Christianity as the state religion of Rome. The specific time of this event can only be understood, not expressed in words. Theodosius defeated the Arian faction, and the Nicene faction has since been dominant. Christianity completed its internal rectification. The next step was to eliminate the threat of heresy. Heresy was polytheism. Although Julian's religious policy was a failure, it also reflected that the acceptance of polytheism in Roman society at that time was still very high. The influence of Christianity among the grassroots people was probably still not as good as polytheism. What Theodosius had to do next was to suppress polytheism. Theodosius enacted a large number of laws. In December of 380, Theodosius prohibited sacrifices for the purpose of divination of the future. This was in contrast to Valens, who, due to his superstition in divination, had carried out a major purge in 71st, on January 10, 381. Theodosius issued another edict against polytheists, and in May of the same year, he issued an edict against Manihimses. The Bishop of Milan, St. Ambrose, played an important role in the process of suppressing polytheism. The senators who adhered to the polytheistic faith chose Symmachus as their representative to debate with Ambrose. The polytheists were indignant. "Noble king and head of the empire, please have mercy and respect my already aged life. Let a pious life spend its last years without interference. Since I do not regret it, let me continue to follow the ancient rituals. Since I was born free, allow me to continue to follow the familiar system." It was this religion that placed the entire world under the rule of Roman law. It was those rituals that drove out Hannibal and the Gauls from our cities and temples. And at an age like mine, with my hair as white as frost, must I still endure such unbearable humiliation? I know nothing about the new system, yet I am still asked to accept it. But I know very well that changing old things will lose honor and become a shameful act. In short, the ancestral law cannot be changed. Ambrose was tip minus for minus that. Our Roman legions are brave and well minus disciplined, so they can win every battle. What does this have to do with your pile of gods? Excessive respect for the ancients will only hinder the progress of skills and make humanity return to a primitive state. Only the doctrine of Christianity is the truth and can save humanity. Any form of polytheism will lead the deceived believers to the wrong path and fall into the abyss of eternal destruction. Whether Christianity could save the Roman Empire was a question, but that polytheism could not save the Roman Empire was already a truth. Julian had personally verified it. After Ambrose, Theodosius also personally took the stage. At a plenary session of the Senate, the emperor, in accordance with the tradition of the Republic, proposed an important topic to them, which is the better policy, the religious worship of Jupiter or Christ. The emperor said that everyone could vote freely, but who would dare to vote against Theodosius in front of the emperor? Symmachus was later exiled on trumped-up charges. Many long-standing Roman families, under the might of the emperor, chose to convert to Christianity. Theodosius pressed on, issuing a series of regulations against polytheism, prohibiting sacrifices and sacrificial rituals. The polytheistic temples within the Roman Empire were also gradually destroyed. The famous Olympic Games were also banned as part of polytheistic customs. Parents who believed in polytheism were not allowed to interfere with their children's participation in Christian rituals, and so on. There are many controversies about this point, so I won't go into detail here. The polytheistic believers, faced with the prohibition of their customs and the destruction of their temples, could do nothing. There were not even any martyrs. On the one hand, this proved that the concept of dying for religion was not common among polytheists. On the other hand, it also showed that Theodosius did not carry out a complete extermination. The final collapse of polytheism can be said to have died out silently. Here, I will answer the question I raised before. Did Christianity cause the fall of the Roman Empire? Although the Western Roman Empire came to an end less than 100 years after Theodosius, the proximity in time cannot be used to deduce a causal relationship. In the 100 schools of thought of the 4th century, Neoplatonists and the various Christian factions such as the Nicene and Nestorian factions debated with each other. The emperors sometimes, based on personal preference, supported one faction and suppressed the others. If we broaden our perspective to the entire Roman Empire, these debates were mostly limited to a limited number of scholars and priests. The emperor himself was not necessarily concerned with the content of the education itself. What they cared about was, in the context of the decline of polytheism, choosing one faction as the Roman religion, shaping a centralized religious system, and monopolizing its right of interpretation. As for the urban and rural people in the vast provinces, the impact they received was quite limited. It might even be that the object of their prayers simply changed from a certain God to Jesus Christ. The practice of making statues among the people still existed, to the extent that the successors of Theodosius had to issue a special decree to prohibit it. The above is the overall religious picture of the Roman Empire up to the end of the 4th century. We cannot find any strong evidence to prove the correlation between the change of religion and the military defeats of Rome during this period, let alone a causal relationship. After roughly sorting out Theodosius's religious policy, in the next video, we will continue to narrate his political and military measures, as well as the causes and consequences of the Battle of the Frigidus. Stay tuned. Video production is not easy. I hope everyone will give more likes, shares, and interactions so that we can continue to update. In addition, the exclusive channel for power-up charging is continuously being updated. When did Roman Christianity completely defeat Roman polytheism? This was a long process with no specific time known. But if we only look at it from a symbolic perspective, there really is a battle that can be called the final showdown between the old gods of polytheism and the new god of Christianity. That is the Battle of the Frigidus in 394 AD. Theodosius I won a victory in this battle, thus clearing the last stumbling block to his succession plan and placing the vast territory of the Roman Empire under the rule of one emperor for the last time. This is what everyone often calls the last unification of the Roman Empire. Not only that, but this war was also described by the contemporary poet Claudian as a victory of God over the old gods. Because before the battle began, Eugenius and Arbogast of the Western Empire placed a statue of the old polytheistic god Jupiter on the edge of the battlefield. Their banners were also painted with the image of Hercules. On the first day of the battle, the old gods seemed to have won a victory. The attack launched by Theodosius suffered heavy casualties and had little effect. Not only that, but his rear was also cut off by the cunning old comrade Arbogast, and he was almost trapped and killed on the battlefield. It seemed that everything was about to end. Why did Theodosius fall into a disadvantage in the battle? And how did he gain the advantage and come back from the dead? Did God really help Theodosius? Don't go away. We'll be right back after the opening credits. With Theodosius's efforts, Christianity in the Eastern Roman Empire gained an absolute advantage. But this did not mean that the Western region would follow in his footsteps. The political situation in the West had not been stable for nearly 20 years since the death of Valentinian I. Gratian, Maximus, Valentinian II, Arbogast, Eugenius, and I'll take the stage. Especially under the leadership of Arbogast and Eugenius, polytheism regrouped in the western region of Rome. Although Eugenius himself was a Christian, he sympathized with polytheism and allowed the reopening of the polytheistic temples that had been closed during the reigns of Gratian and Valentinian II. The Roman historian Zosimus wrote that Arbogast chose Eugenius precisely as part of his plan to revive Roman polytheism. Whether this plan existed or not, the public polytheistic worship under Eugenius's rule did indeed have a tendency to increase. Theodosius's action of promoting his son Honorius to Augustus in early 393 showed that from the very beginning, he had no intention of recognizing the Eugenius government. Now, the actions of Eugenius and Arbogast undoubtedly gave him a just cause to send troops. But before that, let's turn the clock back to 387 and 390 AD and talk about two vicious incidents that were previously skipped: the turmoil in Antioch and the massacre of Thessaloniki. The riot in Antioch is easy to understand. The residents of this city have never been easy to deal with. During Julian's reign, they mocked Julian's beard. During Jovian's reign, they mocked Jovian's origin. When it came to Theodosius, it was no exception. After the Battle of Adrianople, the Roman Empire was forced to impose heavy taxes on various provinces. What Goths? What Huns? How could the citizens of Antioch stand this? What does the war in Thrace have to do with me in Antioch? In 389 AD, on the 10th anniversary of Theodosius's accession, he prepared to hold a peace celebration to commemorate it and enhance his legitimacy. This banquet required another levy of taxes. The powder keg of Antioch was immediately ignited. The petitioning crowds surrounded the court of the administrative officials. At the beginning, they cried and pleaded in a low voice, asking the authorities to come forward and make a decision for all the people. Who knew that the arrogant officials were arrogant and rude, treating the people's long-cherished wish as a criminal act of resisting the authorities. So the anger of the people of Antioch grew stronger and stronger. The people of Antioch then started their traditional special ability mocking and ridiculing the officials of Antioch. Then they probably felt it was not enough and gradually escalated to angry curses. At first, it was only aimed at the lower-level government agencies. Then it evolved into attacking and insulting the emperor's personality and dignity. After moving their mouths, they also had to move their hands. The royal statues of Antioch suffered a catastrophe. The statues of Theodosius himself, plus his father the elder Theodosius, his wife Flaxilla, and his two sons Arcadius and Honorius were all pushed down from their pedestals, dragged indecently through the streets, and finally smashed to pieces. Upon learning of this news, Theodosius was furious. "This is outrageous. You people of Antioch are suspected of being too urbanized." 20- days later, the people of Antioch learned of the emperor's will on this matter and the judgment on Antioch. This provincial capital full of arrogant habits would no longer be qualified to enjoy the title of a city. It was deprived of the land, privileges, and taxes under the jurisdiction of the famous eastern city and was demoted to a village under the jurisdiction of the nearby city of Laodicea. At the same time, all the baths, amphitheaters, and theaters in the city were closed. All the citizens, pastimes and entertainment programs were stopped. The distribution of cheap grain was cancelled, and special personnel were sent to investigate personal conduct and find out the perpetrators. Those who directly destroyed the sacred statues, and those who stood by and did not do their best to stop them, all needed to be dealt with according to law. The richest citizens of Antioch were brought before the judge for severe interrogation. The land and property of the criminals were confiscated and then auctioned off. Seeing that Antioch was about to be deminus-urbanized, even the envoy who received the order could not bear it and persuaded the emperor to withdraw this order. Theodosius also gradually calmed down after a fit of temper, so he went along with it and announced that bygones were bygones, pardoning the crimes of the citizens of Antioch and restoring Antioch's original status. Theodosius also commended the Senate of Constantinople, praising them for disregarding their own interests and pleading for the suffering people of Antioch. The citizens of Antioch, to repay the emperor for not killing them, built more than 1,000 new statues for Theodosius. If the people of Antioch were lucky, then the people of Thessalonica were really unlucky for 8 lifetimes. The cause of the rebellion here was even more absurd. The general stationed in Thessalonica at that time was Butteric, of Gothic origin. It is said that Butteric had a boy of outstanding appearance under his command. This boy aroused the lust of a famous charioteer in the circus. The charioteer frantically pursued this little boy. The little boy naturally was not willing. The charioteer then tried to take him by force. As a result, Butteric found out about this and ordered the charioteer to be thrown into prison. There is also a saying that this little boy was Butteric, and the person the charioteer wanted to take by force was Butteric himself. If I catch you, I'll hee you. How should I put it? This style is really a bit stinging. In short, when it came to the day of the driving competition, the crowd could not see their favorite charioteer and were greatly disappointed. For the audience, what they valued was the charioteer's skill, not his moral. Being bad at it is the original sin. As for who this charioteer wanted to take by force, what does it have to do with me? As long as he doesn't take me. The people of Thessalonica believed that this charioteer must have been persecuted by the army. Due to Butteric's Gothic identity, the crowd's dissatisfaction was fueled. Just at this time, the main force of the garrison in Thessalonica had been transferred to support the emperor's war in Italy. The remaining forces were completely unable to resist when attacked by the furious crowd. Butteric and several major officials were all brutally killed by the mob. Some people also dragged their bruised and battered bodies through the streets in a parade. Emperor Theodosius was staying at the court in Mediomena at the time. He was extremely shocked when he received the report of the riot in Thessalonica. This general Butteric was meritorious, and Theodosius had always thought highly of him, who knew that he would capsize in a ditch. Theodosius's old problem immediately flared up. He immediately ordered the punishment of the residents of Thessalonica. Maybe his original intention was good, just wanting to punish these mobs according to law. As a result, the order changed its flavor after it was issued. The Roman army may have had some problems in understanding, believing that punishing these mobs was equivalent to killing all these mobs. The Roman army even used a conspiracy before launching the massacre. The citizens of Thessalonica received a notice issued by the emperor's order, falsely inviting them to watch the chariot races. As a result, what awaited these spectators was not the charioteers, but fully armed soldiers. The massacre lasted for a full 3 hours. The number of victims, according to the most conservative estimate, was also more than 7,000. Some people even believe that it reached 15,000. The massacre of Thessalonica cast a shadow on Theodosius's reputation. The debate about the person responsible for this massacre has never stopped, but Theodosius must have had some responsibility in this incident. Faced with this vicious incident, Theodosius was at a loss. In the end, it was the Archbishop of Milan, Ambrose, who showed him a clear path. You have sinned like David, so you must also repent like him. Didn't you say you support Christianity? Then don't put on the airs of an emperor. You have to repent according to our rules. According to the church regulations of the 4th century, the most lenient punishment for a murderer was also 20 years of hard penance. In that case, Theodosius would need to repent for at least 140,000 years, and today would only be the beginning. But Christianity could not really excommunicate this Emperor Theodosius. In the end, they just made a show of it. Theodosius personally went to the church to perform the penance ceremony, thereby saving his reputation. But in fact, the entire penance story was more likely a carefully designed public relations stunt in cooperation between the court and Ambrose, using the moral story of making a mistake and repenting to cover up the fact that Theodosius, who had taken Mediomena, had a broken chain of command over the army in Thessalonica. Now let's turn the clock back to the summer of 394. Theodosius was about to go west to fight his old comrade. Theodosius's army was complex in composition, containing a large number of auxiliary troops composed of barbarians such as Goths, Alans, and Arabs. Theodosius appointed to supreme commanders, Tim as Iusen still Cho, to command the Roman army. The command of the barbarian auxiliary troops was given to the 2 Goths, Gain as Saul, and the former king of the kingdom of Kartli, Curious. The young Alaric, the future famous Gothic king, also served as a commander of a detachment in the barbarian auxiliary army on this western expedition. The Western Emperor Eugenius and the general Arbogast had learned from the previous mistakes and failures of Maximus. Arbogast deployed his troops within Italy, allowing Theodosius's legions to easily occupy the provinces of Pannonia, reach the foot of the Julian Alps, and left the main passes of the mountains empty. Theodosius then led his army through the gorges in the towering mountains. He found that the enemy's camp extended in the fields ahead, all the way to Aquileia in the rear. Their 2 sides were the continuous remnants of the Alps, and the only flat ground in front was blocked by a river. This was the Frigidus River, that is, the Cold River. The main force of the Western army crossed the Cold River and built their camp on the east of the Cold River, fighting with their backs to the water. The last east-west showdown of the Roman Empire thus began. In this battle, the specific scale of the army is not clearly recorded. According to the estimates of later historians, the strength of the 2 sides should be roughly equal, and the Western army was well rested and occupied a favorable terrain in front of the city of Aquileia. The advantage in this battle was with the Western army. Before the battle began, Eugenius and Arbogast placed a statue of Jupiter on the edge of the battlefield. Their banners were painted with the image of Hercules. Faced with the geographical disadvantage, Theodosius decided to take the initiative to attack. He sent the Gothic legion as the vanguard of the army to first charge the enemy. The Goths were strong and suitable as a vanguard, and doing so could also consume their strength. The battle began. The Goths fought hard. Not only the Goths, but Curious of Kartli also died heroically in the battle. The Eastern army paid a heavy price. However, even so, the Eastern army still failed to achieve any results, and instead gradually lost. Night fell. Theodosius led his troops to retreat slightly. The emperor retreated to a nearby forest, where he spent a desolate night. The Eastern army was hungry and could not sleep. Under the protection of the old gods, Eugenius won the victory on the first day untraveled with his generals in the camp. And Theodosius's old comrade, Arbogast, did not relax. He understood that the Theodosius on the other side was not an easy person to deal with. To prevent any unexpected incidents, he secretly sent troops to cross the mountains in front and occupy the various mountain passes behind Theodosius. The sun rose. Theodosius suddenly found that he had been surrounded. He could not help but fall into despair. Who knew that when the mountains and rivers were exhausted and there was no way out, there was a bright future? Soon, he received a piece of news that brought him back from the dead. That is, several of the other side's commanders wanted to rebel for money. As long as Theodosius made a promise of money and official position, Theodosius did not hesitate and immediately accepted. At that time, he could not find a formal document, so he wrote down the agreement between the two sides on a note, and then he signed and approved this agreement. Theodosius then announced this exciting news to his soldiers. The morale of the Eastern army was immediately boosted, and they once again took the initiative to charge the enemy. The two armies engaged in close combat in front of the formation. At this time, the legendary divine wind blew from the east. In fact, it was just a common strong wind in the Alps, but it was described by the wandering poets as God helping in the form of wind. Theodosius's troops were in the leeward position and would not be affected by the strong wind. The swirling sand and dust hit the faces of the Western army. The army of Eugenius and Arbogast was in chaos. They could not stand firm one by one. The javelins they threw were either blown back by the wind or lost their accuracy. Just at this moment, the defecting generals of the Western army lead their troops to turn their coats in front of the formation. Eugenius's army instantly collapsed. He himself was captured on the spot and knelt at Theodosius's feet. Theodosius's soldiers, however, did not give him a chance to live. Arbogast also barely escaped with his life, fleeing alone to the mountains in the wild. His followers were all scattered. Seeing that the future was bleak and knowing that Theodosius would not let him go, Arbogast finally chose to commit suicide. Although Theodosius won the Battle of the Frigidus, the price he paid was extremely heavy. The losses on both sides exceeded 10,000. If he could have acted quickly when the news of Valentinian's death came, this destructive civil war might have been avoided. If there was any benefit to the Roman Empire from this battle, it was only that it greatly consumed the strength of the Gothic barbarian allied army. The victory of the civil war cleared the last stumbling block for Theodosius to promote his dynastic succession plan. But the time God left him was running out. The weakness and incompetence of his son meant that after him, the supreme power of the empire would be taken over by other political forces. The ebb and flow of these forces would soon push the eastern and western parts of the Roman state onto completely different historical trajectories. In September of 394 AD, Theodosius, at a heavy price, finally, after 30 years, placed the Roman Empire under his sole rule again, creating the last unification in the history of the Roman Empire. However, at this moment, neither Theodosius nor the entire Roman people would have thought that this unification would last for less than half a year. They would not have thought even more that this unification would become the swan song of Roman history. The history of the Roman Empire began to collapse from then on, gone forever. Video production is not easy. I hope everyone will give more likes, shares, and interactions so that we can continue to update. The Roman Empire was divided into the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire in 395 AD. This is common knowledge that everyone learns in middle school textbooks. But what if I told you that this statement is actually not in line with the actual situation? In fact, the Roman Empire never really split. Viewers who have watched the previous series on the Tetrarchate, even the Constantinople dynasty, should understand that since Diocletian implemented the Tetrarchate, co-rule by multiple emperors had become the norm for the Roman Empire. Some of these emperors cooperated closely, while others fought against each other. But regardless of their relationship and how they divided their work, it was still the consensus of the Romans that there was only one Roman state. In fact, generally speaking, the relationship between the eastern and western parts of the Roman Empire after 395 AD was even significantly better than before 395. The various emperors within the Roman Empire used to break out in civil wars every once in a while. After 395, the so-called Eastern and Western Roman empires were instead a loving family, with you in me and me in you. What did Theodosius' division measure in 395 AD really mean? What was the Roman split in the textbooks all about? This video is the final chapter of the Theodosian dynasty. Don't go away, the excitement will be right back. In September of 394 AD, Theodosius, at a great cost, defeated his old comrade Arbogast in the Battle of the Frigidus. After 30 years, he once again placed the Roman Empire under the rule of one person. After the victory of the battle, Theodosius continued to advance towards the western court's location, Mediomena. He announced that he would forgive the crimes of the families of the western usurpers and did his best to stabilize this empire that had been repeatedly severely damaged in the past 30 years. In the 15 years of being appointed in danger and managing with difficulty, what also collapsed was Theodosius's own body. His health had actually never been completely sound. He had been ill many times after ascending the throne, and one of them almost cost him his life. After 10 years of court life, he suddenly experienced such a fierce battle, which caused his nearly 50-year-old body to be unable to bear it again. As for the transfer of power after he went to see Jesus, it can be seen from his action of promoting Honorius to Augustus. However, plans could not keep up with changes. Theodosius, who knew that his days were numbered, could only urgently send an order to Honorius, who was still in Constantinople, ordering him to come to Mediomena immediately. He himself forced himself to go to Mediomena first and wait for his son's arrival there. In the winter of that year, the Huns, whose power had already reached the north bank of the Danube, crossed the river and invaded the territory of the Goths. The overwhelmed Theodosius and his eldest son Arcadius did not provide any support. The year 395 AD arrived in paleness and plainness. In mid-January, the 10-year-old Honorius, under the escort of his cousin, that is, Stilicho's wife, Serena, crossed the mountains and came to Mediomena, who knew that the father, before him, was already seriously ill and had reached his last moments. Finally seeing his young son, Theodosius barely pulled himself together and forced himself to attend the opening ceremony of the games held to celebrate the safe arrival of the young emperor in the amphitheater. However, before the games were over, Theodosius fell ill and could not get up. The next day, that is, on the night of January 17, 395 AD, Theodosius died suddenly in Mediomena at the age of 40-9. On February 25, his body was transported to the cathedral. Bishop Ambrose personally gave a speech at his funeral. The funeral procession then, under strict escort, began the long journey back to Constantinople. After that, his two sons ruled in Constantinople and Mediomena, respectively. This is the origin of the Roman split in the history books. Let's return to the question at the beginning. Did the Roman Empire really split in 395 AD? The answer is no. The similar co-rule tradition can be traced back to at least the 3rd century. The father and son Valerian and Gallienus ruled the eastern and western parts of the empire, respectively. The reason that prompted this action to gradually become a political tradition was the change in military needs. The emperors after the 3rd century crisis chose to place the main striking force of the empire by their side, forming a powerful imperial escort army. But at the same time, this also meant that the emperor had to bear a considerable degree of military responsibility himself to defend the borders. However, the situation of the empire's borders being leaky on all sides led to the inevitable need for multiple rulers to be responsible for the defense of different borders. Constantine handed over the empire to his 3 sons. Constantitius entrusted the western defense to his 2 cousins. By the time Valentinian ascended the throne, people had already begun to actively demand that he nominate his co-minus ruler. From this, it can be seen that another reason for the continuation of the co-minus rule phenomenon was that between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, with the promulgation of several decrees expanding citizenship, the Roman population expanded greatly. Then, the reforms of Diocletian and Constantine further caused most local elites to shift from investing in their hometowns to seeking promotion in the bureaucratic system. The sharp increase in Roman political participants led to the need for multiple sub-minus centers to distribute favors to more people. Therefore, Theodosius' division behavior for the Romans at that time, if not without any ripples, should at least be taken for granted. Why do you say we are split? As for the Eastern and Western Roman empires, in the eyes of the Romans, they were called the Eastern rule of the Roman state and the Western rule of the Roman state, respectively. It was about the distribution of power within the same country, not a country splitting into 2 countries. Secondly, from a practical observation, the connection between the Eastern and Western governments after 395 was still very close. Stilicho was the region left by Theodosius for his 2 sons. He could nominally command, and in fact did command, almost the entire army of the empire, until he returned the eastern army stranded in the west to Constantinople. More than 30 years later, the Theodosia Code, although almost all the work was promoted by Theodosius II of the East, was still jointly promulgated in the name of Theodosius II and Valentinian II of the West, until the Western Roman Empire was really beyond saving. The Eastern emperors often interfered in Western affairs through military or non-military means, including but not limited to sending troops to support when the chaos was at its most difficult, successively supporting the accession of emperors such as Valentinian II and Anthemius, emptying the state treasury, and sending a large army to assist in the expedition against the Vandals, etc. The government bureaucratic systems of the East and West were also interconnected. There were also many examples of fathers and sons serving as officials in the East and West, respectively. To add one more point, after the death of Theodosius I, the Eastern and Western governments of the empire disputed the jurisdiction over the Great Illyrian region for more than 20 years. That is to say, even the clear division of power took a considerable amount of wrangling. Even just from the above superficial phenomena, the theory of split is already untenable. To summarize briefly, there was no East-West split, but only the distribution of power between 2 governments within one country. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD was essentially the collapse of the Western rule of the Roman state, while the Eastern rule of the Roman state continued until 1453 AD, and during this period, this regime canon should always be called the state of the Romans. Next, let's summarize Theodosius's family. Theodosius's parents, the elder Theodosius and Thermontaye, had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son was Theodosius. The second son was named Honorius. The daughter's name is not recorded. Theodosius' siblings also have no records. Theodosius himself married 2 wives in succession, Aelia Flaccilla and Galla, the daughter of Valentinian I. Among them, he and Empress Flaccilla had 2 sons and 1 daughter, namely Arcadius, Honorius, and Pulcher IA. The daughter died young. The 2 sons served as emperors in the east and west, respectively. Princess Galla also had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest son, Gratian, died at about the age of 3. The eldest daughter, Galla Placid IA, was once married to the Visigothic king Adrianople. After Adrianople's assassination, she returned to the western court and married Flavius Constantitius, that is, Constantitius III. Galla died in childbirth in 390, for when giving birth to her second son, John, a tragic 1- corpse -to lives event. When Theodosius died, his eldest son Arcadius was only 18 years old, and his second son Honorius was only 11. Next, let's briefly introduce the situation of these 2 sons who had a worse reputation than their father. Arcadius was born in Spain in 377. In 383 AD, he was promoted to co-emperor by his father. This eldest son did not seem very smart. Historians describe his appearance as follows: he was short, dark-skinned, thin, and dull. His speech was slow, and his eyes were sleepy. His drooping eyelids revealed a clear stupidity. His mental defects and weak character made him inevitably dominated by the powerful ministers in the court. In the more than 10 years of Arcadius's reign, he almost never really held political power. He had no interest in political or military affairs, but was devoted to religious affairs. His religious attitude could be said to be consistent. Under his rule, polytheism was further suppressed, and the advantage of Christianity was further established. His rule witnessed a series of powerful figures, including Rufinus, Eutropius, Gainas, etc., fighting for power and profit. If we were to summarize his reign, it could be described as chaotic, but not damaged. As for the second son, Honorius, he is even more jaw-dropping. It is said that after Alaric sacked the city of Rome, Emperor Honorius, who was hiding in the city of Ravenna, received news from a eunuch that Rome was finished. Honorius shouted, "Impossible, absolutely impossible. I just fed him." Honorius had a handsome rooster whose name was also Rome. The eunuch understood his words and explained, "It's the city of Rome that's finished, not your chicken." Emperor Honorius was relieved to hear this. "Oh, good, good. I thought my chicken was dead. It turns out it's the city of Rome that has fallen. That's fine then." Although this story is most likely a satirical allegory by historians, Honorius's indifference to the country's peril was also vividly displayed. Finally, we come to the traditional special ability of the series finale: how to evaluate Theodosius. Militarily, he did not complete any large scale conquest. Even in civil wars, he was hesitant and almost overturned. Faced with the invasion of the Goths, he was also forced to compromise. In terms of military achievements, Theodosius was not at the same level as his predecessors, such as Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, Diocletian, and Constantine. But apart from this, in the 16 years of his reign, Theodosius spent more than half of his time in Constantinople, and there are still many measures worthy of praise. In terms of law, he showed sympathy for the lowest class. For example, criminals sentenced to death, imprisonment, or exile would be given 30 days to arrange their posthumous affairs. No matter what crime the father committed, his property should also be left to his children. When the state purchased the harvest of farmers, the price should not be lower than the market price. In the religious aspect, Theodosius also promoted the Nicene Orthodox faction, to the mainstream and initially created a centralized religious system. In my opinion, Theodosius was a steady realist most of the time. He was practical in military affairs and rarely underestimated the enemy and advanced rashly. After realizing that the Roman army could not defeat the Goths in a frontal field battle for a while, he turned to play to his side's advantage in defending cities, and through a protracted war of attrition, regained control of the Danube border. He was thoughtful in politics, maintaining a delicate relationship with Gratian, Valentinian, and even the two usurping old comrades in the West. He steadily pushed his two sons to the position of imperial heirs, but he also had impulsive moments. In his attitude towards the riot in Thessaloniki, he made a big mistake and caused a bloody massacre. His title of the Great came more from his support for the Nicene faction than from the achievements of his rule. Nevertheless, Theodosius, who was appointed in the midst of a defeated army in the 16 years of his reign, rescued the Eastern Empire from a crisis where almost all its elite were lost, did his best to rebuild the army, and successfully curbed the ambition of the Goths. His presence in Constantinople also maintained the stability of the Eastern political situation for more than 10 years. The above achievements make him fully worthy of being called a capable ruler. When Theodosius died, he left several legacies to the Roman world. First, the political and religious system with the Nicene Creed as its core became the dominant force in the country. Second, forced by the shortage of troops in the East, he had to greatly increase the number of barbarian soldiers in the Roman army. At the same time, he adopted a strategy of both pulling and fighting against barbarian tribes such as the Goths to achieve his political goals. But at the same time, it also led to the emergence of capable, prestigious, and knowledgeable barbarian leaders like Alaric. He also accepted the Vandal, still Icho into the Theodosia family, making this nephew in law the protector of his son Honorius. Finally, Theodosius' ambition to have his family rule the entire Roman world ultimately led to a costly civil war with Eugenius in the West. After his death, the powerful ministers behind his two sons actually became the new power center of the empire. When the empire needed to jointly deal with internal and external affairs, the opposition of these powerful ministers dispersed the empire's resources, laying the groundwork for the later power struggles of the empire, especially in the West. In any case, the sudden death of Theodosius in early 395 AD marked the end of an era. Under the rule of his sons, the development paths of the eastern and western parts of the Roman Empire were about to diverge and eventually lead to completely different destinies. Although the Romans at that time did not realize all this, and video production is not easy. I hope everyone will give more likes, shares, and interactions.